H.R. 3654, the Middle Class Borrower Protection Act, undoes a bad policy implemented at the worst time. Americans are struggling to afford housing. I'm talking about the loan level price adjustments that the Federal Housing Finance Agency, FHFA, put into effect on May 1st of this year. This policy essentially implemented a cross-subsidy to individuals with lower down payments and lower credit scores. Loan level price adjustments are upfront fees which adjust the final interest rate charged on mortgage loans based on different risk characteristics associated with individual loans. The most notable characteristics would be the mortgage's underlying loan-to-value ratio and the buyer's credit score. While such fees may be necessary for Fannie and Freddie Mac, collectively known as the GSEs, to raise capital and adequately hedge against credit risk, the adjustments announced by FHFA would disproportionately hurt individuals with credit scores of 680 or greater. To put that in perspective, the average credit score is around 710, and nearly 19 out of 20 Americans have credit scores above 680. The other thing is credit scores alone aren't a proxy for wealth or income. Therefore, most Americans would likely be hurt by these fees. However, those with a credit score below 680 will benefit from lower rates than the prior LLPA assessment. This fee change violates the fundamental principle of risk-based pricing. Lower risk borrowers should pay lower prices than higher risk borrowers for access to the same credit. For the FHFA's opaque approach to assessing LLPAs, the result of their new policies speak for themselves. The Middle Class Borrower Protection Act would reinstate the old LLPA prices that were in effect prior to May 1st, while also directing the Government Accounting Office to complete an independent study of the processes and data used by FFA to change the prices, including the impact of those changes on the safety and soundness of the GSEs, which I'll add have been in conservatorship under the federal government for 15 years. Then GAO would report to Congress within 1 year of the study. FHFA would be prohibited from changing the LLPAs until 90 days after the report, after which it would be required to, 1, follow the basic agency notice and comment period for making any new change to the LLPA fee, and 2, ensure that the future fee adjustments be made based on actual risk posed to the mortgage. FHFA would also be prohibited from imposing any new fee on borrowers based on their debt-to-income ratio, which was an idea they considered implementing effective August 1st. Finally, I will acknowledge that over the past weekend, the Congressional Budget Office scored this bill, and they assessed a cost of $1.8 billion for implementing this bill. I believe the fact that CBO says this bill costs a single penny is absurd and exposes a glaring flaw within our legislative process. Perhaps CBO has a rebuttal, but that would require them to show their work, which they have not. This is why I have long advocated for another bill of mine, the CBO Show Your Work. Now, this past week exemplified just why we need transparent processes when legislating. The reality is these fees aren't even going directly to the Treasury. While the GSEs are in conservatorship, the money is supposed to go to the balance sheet of Freddie and Fannie so that they can accumulate capital. And as this rule was announced, the explicit purpose was to grow capital on the balance sheets of Fannie and Freddie. So these were taken over by the federal government in the wake of the 2008 financial crisis. They've remained in conservatorship of the federal government, and the revenue isn't coming in directly to the Treasury. It's meant to actually free the GSEs from control of the federal government. These revenues were not imposed by Congress, so there really isn't a need for us to replace the revenue that the administration imposed with a really misguided rule. So there was no revenue coming in on April 30th. On May 1st, they implement this policy change, and somehow we're supposed to come up with the revenue to offset it. Now, I argued against doing that. I asked the Rule Committee to ignore the advice, misguided advice of the Congressional Budget Office, and to not implement a pay-for, because it's not we didn't cause this expense to occur, and frankly, it's not even a real expense. It's money that it's essentially a tax imposed by the administration. So, because of the rules, we offered a manager's amendment, which was ultimately incorporated in this bill. So we add 1 year to a 10 basis point fee that is assessed on every Fannie and Freddie loan, regardless of your credit. Just as a cover, that rule has been in place since a bill passed in 1992. It was set to expire in 2032. Now it will expire in 2033. I hope between now and then we can change that, and we can also liberate Fannie and Freddie from their ongoing conservatorship, which I will note has lasted longer than Britney Spears' conservatorship. And the only way that it would cost the federal government money is if the conservator is actually raking money out of it and funding their own operations, which is not what's supposed to happen. It's supposed to stay with Fannie and Freddie. So it shouldn't be costing the federal government a dime to implement the Middle Class Borrower Protection Act. Nevertheless, Fannie and Freddie will benefit from 1 extra year of money being collected under this manager's amendment that was adopted and incorporated in the bill. But let me return and focus on the bill at hand, the Middle Class Borrowers Protection Act. Let's think about this. A federal agency acting under its own purview and not subject to Administrative Procedures Act implemented a politically motivated cross-subsidy through a clear money grab on unsuspecting, credit-worthy borrowers. This wasn't a decision by Congress. This was simply the FHFA using its position as conservator of the GSEs to increase the government's baseline. Now Congress is trying to undo the changes, re-implement a policy that was in place just 8 weeks ago. However, Congress has, as I said, had to pay for this fake shortfall. Like we see time and again, only in Washington, D.C. would math like this make sense. It's imperative for this body to protect the cornerstone of American dream by promoting housing affordability, and H.R. 3654 does just that. I urge all of my colleagues to support this bill, and I reserve the balance of my time.
Gentleman from Ohio reserves.